Welcome to the 185th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with fantasy writer Anne Leonard, author of the novel Moth and Spark. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Anne Leonard, author of the novel Moth and Spark. Anne, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you.
Great. Well, can I have you read the first couple of pages of Moth and Spark?
Sure. So this is the first part of the prologue, so I'm not going to give any background information at all because it's what you get when you start. Riding. He had been riding when the dragon appeared overhead and came slowly, inevitably down. It was a cloudy day and he was in the fells. The air still had plenty of winter in it here, high up. There were 2 men with him from the garrison. There had been no purpose to the ride besides itself. He had been sick of the dirt and smells and noise and press of soldiers in the hold, and needed to clear his head with exercise and open air. Then the dragon's cry, sharp and compelling as a hunting hawk's, but longer, fiercer, more dreadful. He had heard it 100 times, and it still made the hair on the back of his neck rise and his skin prickle. He was prey, and his body knew it. The horses knew it, too, and reared and neighed in terror. Corin was nearly thrown, and one of the soldiers was. The dragon descended. It folded its shimmering blue wings with a rush of hot air that smelled like sulfur. Long ivory claws gouged the earth. It was huge, its snout at least the length of a tall man's arm. Silver scales on its sides glistened even under the gray sky. It crouched, tail switching back and forth, nostrils steaming. By the time Corin had his own horse under control, the second soldier was kneeling beside the first, whose leg was clearly broken. One horse had not gone far, but the other one was out of sight. "Go back for help," Corin said. "There's nothing you can do about a dragon." He did not even touch the hilt of his sword. It was useless. The dragon rider came off the dragon in a smooth and graceful slide. Corin's horse trembled and sweated but did not move. He would stay mounted as long as he could. When he glanced over his shoulder, he saw that the soldier was obeying him and returning. The dragon rider had dark skin and black hair, and when he spoke, it was a different accent from the Mycenaean Corin was used to. "Lord Prince." The tone was hard, mocking. Rider. He felt the dragon looking at him, and he was careful to keep his eyes on the man and not the beast. One who stared too long into a dragon's eyes would go mad. "I have for you a message." "Speak it." "The firekeepers have chosen you to free them from their slavery. Already you walk in Hadon's dreams. He fears you, so he will bring down war. He makes alliances with your enemies and turns your friends against you. This is your task, this and no other, to free the firekeepers from the empire. They will lend you their power so that you will be as them, though still a man, until you have done this. They will do what magic they can for you. Dismount." Corin's legs moved of their own accord. He walked stiffly toward the rider. The rider held out a small golden flask. "Drink this." "No." Faster than anyone could move, the dragon rider had hold of him and forced the liquid down his throat. It was sweet and thin, and it burned. He struggled, but it was no good. 1 swallow, 2 swallows, 3. His mouth had the taste of iron. The dragon rider stepped back. Corin staggered. He felt feverish. The rider said, "You will forget this until the change is complete. When you remember it, then it will be time for you to begin your labor. The firekeepers will watch. Do not shirk it." Darkness closed in on him, and when it lifted, he remembered nothing of the dragon or the rider. He was sitting on the stony track beside the man with a broken leg, waiting, while his horse nuzzled among the rocks to see what thin new grass it could find. And that's the end of that section.
Okay, great. So if someone listening hasn't heard about Moth and Spark yet, how would you describe the novel?
So the shorthand description of it that I've been using was that it was Pride and Prejudice with dragons. But that's very, very general. It's a fantasy. It's got romance in it. I don't think of myself as writing a romance, but a lot of people have found it that's really the strong part of the story. And it has dragons and adventures and wars and all those good things.
That's great. Well, I know that you have a PhD in English, and I'm curious, when you were pursuing that degree, did you know that you wanted to write fiction, or were
Oh
you writing
yeah,
fiction?
I went into the PhD program straight from having graduated from an MFA in fiction writing,
Okay.
and I was trying to figure out how to, be a writer, and being in the academy at the time seemed like the way to go.
Right. And so your MFA program, were you writing science fiction and fantasy, or what was the reception if you were?
Generally, MFA programs are not real keen on genre fiction. Uh,
That's why I ask.
now, magical realism. There was people in my MFA program did some really interesting magical realism and so forth. What I wound up writing at that point was my manuscript was a novel that definitely it was a character whose dreams she interacted with her dream life, which was of the past. And the two plots wound together until he was dreaming of her and she was dreaming of him and so forth. So it was certainly not straightforward realism.
Sure, sure. So do you remember what the spark or the idea that prompted you to write Moth and Spark?
Sure. I had written a novel that was actually out with an agent. I had decided that I was going to go to law school because I'd liked writing that was a really good way to make money as a writer, was to be a lawyer, which is in fact true. But when I had finished the novel that I had finished, I had realized there was this story in me that just kept sticking its head in and it wouldn't go away. And it was this kind of cheesy Cinderella romance story. So I said, okay, damn it, I'm just going to write this and get it out of my system, and then I can write what I really want to write. And that was what turned into Moth and Spark.
That's great. Well, I know that in your PhD program that you've studied and written about race and science fiction and fantasy. As you look at science fiction and fantasy today, do you think diversity in both writers and readers is changing?
Yeah, that's one of the things that's been really interesting to me. I mean, I basically spent a long time away from the field, not reading at all, because this is what happens when you have a job and a kid. And so coming back to it about 15 years later, I see that diversity is a big topic. There are more writers of color. People talk about the lack of writers of color. It's on the table. It's being discussed. There's a lot of activity around it. None of this was going on in the 90s that I could see. And some of this, I'm sure, has to do with the advent of the internet. And I think that that's all really, really great. The field certainly has a really long way to go. There are still too many sites, lists, and things that if you go down, it's pretty much all white men with an occasional white woman thrown in here and there.
Sure. And once you wrote Moth and Spark, what was the path to publication? You said you were working with an agent. Is that the case?
That was a different agent. That book wound up not selling.
Okay.
And I just went on, and I can, in retrospect, I can see why. And I went to law school and then practiced for a couple of years. And all that time I was writing Moth and Spark. And I finally got to a point where I thought I had something that was worth sending out. And so I did the old fashioned thing, sending out queries. And I got a couple of nibbles. And so then I got a little braver and started sending queries to more well-known and established agents. And I landed with the Gernert Company, and I'm extremely happy. I mean, they've done a great job for me.
That's great. That's great. So what books or writers have you read in the past year that inspired you or impressed you that you would mention or recommend, either fiction or nonfiction?
Well, it's pretty much been all fiction. A couple of books that I've read that were just kind of fabulously written and are kind of make me feel like I can't write at all are some not so well-known books. There's one by a guy named Matt Bell. It's published by Soho Press. The title is In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods. which is the really long title, and you kind of think, what? And then all of a sudden, halfway through the book, you realize that it's the perfect title. And it's lyrical, and it's poetic, and the story is amazing and compelling and creepy and all those things. So I definitely recommend that. Also, Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching is another really amazing story with language that I read recently. And I've been reading not a lot, but Cormac McCarthy has been kind of my writer of interest the last year or so.
Gotcha. And what is it about Cormac McCarthy that interests you or appeals to you as a reader?
Well, first of all, I mean, he's just such a good writer, and he hits you in the gut, and it's not fun to read his stuff, and you have to take your time. And I don't know if I'm going to go back and reread it. But so just the fact that as a writer, he can do that to me impresses me. And also his language and his descriptions and his picture of the American West and living in California. That's a thing that I have a lot of awareness of, is we are aware of our geography out here. And even though McCarthy's in Texas, there's a lot of he gets the feeling of it really, really well.
Sure. So what are you working on now? Are you writing another novel?
I am. It feels like it's never going to be finished. It is technically, it would be a sequel to Moth and Spark, although I'm hoping it would be able to stand alone. As Moth and Spark was written as a standalone, I had no intention of writing a sequel, and then I got an idea and thought, well, okay, let's see what happens. So that's what's going on. It's a lot darker and grimmer, and the characters are much less shiny.
Gotcha. Well, given your writing path thus far and the publication of Moth and Spark, what writing advice would you have for someone who might be listening who would like to have their own stories or novels published?
Okay, so generally, of course, just persist. I mean, I'm a lesson in persistence. I got my MFA 20 years ago, and here I am now, finally. I would also say, watch your habits. It's really easy to write with our habits. And I heard this piece of advice from a poet a long time ago. I don't remember who it was now. But break your habits. Find out what they are, watch them, make sure that you break them. And that's one of the things you can best do to help yourself develop as a writer. And also revise.
That's good advice. So where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you and about Moth and Spark?
So my website is AnneLeonardBooks.com, and that's Anne with an E, AnneLeonardBooks.com. And I'm on Twitter at Anne Leonard Auth, AUTH. And I have a Facebook page that is also Anne Leonard Books within the Facebook frame.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Anne Leonard, author of Moth and Spark. The book is available in bookstores now or available as an ebook, so grab a copy. Anne, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you, Jeff.
The stockings are hung and the shopping has begun. This holiday season, shop Cincinnati favorite gift cards at Kroger. Grab a gift card to La Rosa's and enjoy a warm slice of pizza. Or snag a gift card to Grater's and treat yourself to something sweet. Whoever you're shopping for, you'll earn 4 times fuel points on Cincinnati favorite gift cards. Head over to giftcards.kroger.com/Cincinnati-favorites to complete your shopping list and support our local businesses. Available in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Louisville markets only. Restrictions apply. See website for details.